Hi, everyone. Welcome to the South Shore Cultural Center. Welcome to the Chicago Humanities Festival. And welcome to Southside Soul. Um, I'm the driver of this four-person car. I'm going to let them do most of the talking. Our time is like limited, so I want to make sure that we really get it in. But I do want to just say that this building is like a home game for me. I used to live not that far from here, and making the trek up here to walk along the lake was a thing when I was a little kid. So I'm glad to be home. It's nice to be in South Shore, and I'm glad that we are going to be able to present to you some very, very good information and three really cool individuals. And some of the ancestors are over our shoulder, so that's cool too. And some of them are still around. Not all of them are ancestors, but hopefully we will. You will like our presentation. And here we go. We are on the south side of Chicago, in the southernmost part, for me anyway. And growing up, musical influences were everywhere. And we were talking in the back about where do we start this conversation? I think out of respect for those who came way before us, we have to start with Chicago gospel and how it was the foundation and the influencer for a lot of different musics. And I will begin with you, Ayana Contreras. Yes, I will. You're looking around. When we talk about gospel music, we talk naturally Mahalia and Dorsey and people like that. How much of that is the foundation for what we know as the Chicago sound and Chicago music?
So,
You are.
you're on. Am I?
Yeah. Hello.
Okay. So I think the sound is as rooted in gospel as it is in blues and jazz, and I think that is what makes Chicago's soul unique is that jazz in it, as opposed to some other cities. I mean, Philly has it, but there are some other cities that are less jazz influenced. But in terms of the gospel, it's totally baked in. I mean, you think about Sam Cooke. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Think about Sam Cooke and his connection to the Soul Stirrers, Johnny Taylor a little later on, and a whole bunch of other folks that really honestly started in the church. I don't know that it's inextricably linked in a lot of ways.
Lou Rawls, too.
For sure. I mean,
That was
the
Sam's
list,
buddy.
we could go on and on and on and on and
Yeah.
on about that one. But
And so I'll extend that to you as well, Tony.
Well, my focus is a bit different, but obviously the church was the foundation and the location where a lot of these artists hone their skills, and basically it was the reverse of how it is today. Today, in the past, the church influenced the mainstream, and in today's time, the mainstream influences the church.
I think that's right.
I'm going to ask you about him later, but the Sunday service stuff, I have a question. Just not now, though. Ruben?
Well, of course, the voices in soul music are, before they went secular, it just come from the church. And that's, not only Chicago, but nationwide. When you hear the voices, and people try to emulate a lot of these songs, and they just cannot get that voice, because the power in a child that grows up singing gospel is so strong, by the time they're 13, 14, 15 years old, and then they decide to go secular, but they have that voice rooted in them. But you have to go also back to the record companies, because it doesn't do anything for anyone if you're not recorded. And that goes all the way back to VJ Records. Vivian Carter and Jimmy Bracken started VJ Records in blues and doo-wop, which come together to create soul as well. So like their first soul record to come through VJ is Jerry Butler and Impressions for Your Precious Love. That changes like the map in terms of music. And out of that group also comes Curtis Mayfield, which is going to change music again in a couple of years, from that period. So being the first black-owned record company, not the first black-owned, but the largest black-owned record company, but opening the doors for other people. And Chicago becomes one of the largest communities of black-owned record companies in the nation.
Go on, I'm sorry.
In reference to gospel, it's also important to note that even before the record companies, the church was the first to give these artists the opportunity to shine, basically, to perform, to have a captivated audience.
I want to, because again, we could talk literally. This is especially with the three of you. We could talk forever about that one part. I do want to mention the influence of radio, particularly in Chicago, on not just the listener, but on how these songs were introduced. I know this is hard to believe, but when I was little, listening to WVON was a thing in this city. It was hard to avoid it. And the influence that the Chess family had on that, well, it was their station, but the influence that they had on that station and how it was programmed and how it was received for many, many years. If your song did not make it on that station, you didn't make it. And I remember seeing Stevie Wonder not too long ago, and he was talking about Chicago and how Chicago was really influential in his career, particularly, I think it was My Cherie Amour or something, one of those songs. And you think about that and you go, wow, we're talking about Stevie Wonder, but he's saying that if it wasn't for Chicago, none of this would have happened. There are many artists that can make that same statement. Do we still have that influence musically on the world? Like, and I'm not stupid. I know we do, but when we start talking about the Kanye Wests, we talk about Jamila Woods and all these new folks that are out now. Is our influence still shining in that respect, you think?
I feel like you asked 13 questions.
That's what I do.
That was a lot of questions.
I also have a question about these cups. What's in this cup?
So taking it back, the radio thing is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I actually just did a talk in New York about black radio, specifically black radio in Chicago. So really talking about WVON, WJPC, WBEE, like GRT, we could go on and on and on. But what black radio actually did and what black radio in Chicago actually did. So we have to take it back just a little bit further. So before these stations like WVON, when WVON launched in 1963, this was like a very new concept that you could have wall-to-wall black music on a powerful station. Before that, you could hear Richard Stams or Al Benson or something on an ethnic radio station alongside maybe like some polka or something. But for it to be one solid station, and you didn't have to be reliant on pop radio to play you in order to get airplay. Like, that was a unique thing, and it was a thing that developed a unique aesthetic musically. So what was playing on WVON might have been the B-side to what was played on CFL, for instance. So in one community, one song was what was connecting to people versus another. I think it's really interesting when you talk about whether we have influence or not. I guess it really depends on who you talk to, because as far as the recordings that became bread and butter on these black radio stations, absolutely, they live on Netflix and commercials and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's hardly a day that goes by where I don't hear something that came from Chicago in some sense. But is it removed from the actual roots of where it came from? I wonder about that, like if the actual narratives are still alive for people.
I think that's where we come in, to make sure that we can, and where you guys come in, to make sure that we control the narrative. I'm watching a football game, and a Microsoft commercial comes on, and Minnie Riperton starts playing, and I go, oh, here we go. That's the Charles Stepney song. That's Le Fleur, you know what I mean? And I'm like, wow, Minnie Riperton been gone many years now. our influence does shine in that respect because I guess it's still bankable to be able to hear good music selling computers, you know?
Bankable for who?
Well, not for us.
And
not for the family either, probably.
When you talk about radio and the power of radio and the power of music, and you go back to the blues, and you start, thinking about the immigration of people from the South up to Chicago, up to Detroit, and other northern cities, is they came with hardly anything besides what's on their back, without very little power. But once the economic growth, working in the factories, buying goods, buying homes, that's what gave them, because all those radio stations were white owned. The station managers were black, the DJs were black, the advertising was black, but they were white owned. But there was a power in economics. We gotta sell products. And you had the population of Chicago like tripled by 1964, so it was an economic growth as well. And that changes blues to soul, because soul is power. Soul is saying, we are here, we are making it. When blues is like, man, I'm down and out, right?
I think that's a simplification, though, because I think blues is the full totality of what it is to be a black person in America. And I think when we limit what blues is and what it has been to people, I think we're doing a disservice to that tradition. So I did want to say that. But I also want to say JPC was the first black-owned radio station in Chicago. It was owned by Ebony Jet, which was fair. It was purchased from as it was originally WJRT and was purchased by JPC. And that was an important moment in radio history here in Chicago. So I did want to say that.
Also introduced the world to Tom Joyner.
That's a long story.
Yeah. But
it's true.
I also, I would be remiss if I did not mention the role of music as activism, particularly Southside Soul, the Staple Singers, who not too far from our location now,
Right.
they lived. How important was that moment for American music to have people like Curtis and the Staple Singers and these Chicago people really leading the charge during that movement?
I think we forget that Chicago, we say second city, but it was really the second largest metropolis and definitely a huge concentration of black people. So it was a natural fit for it to have a large recording, situation happening here and for us to be as influential as we were in that moment. I think the way people looked at Chicago as beaming out this audacious black identity in the mid-20th century, I think is something that is powerful. I think some of those images, the Afro Sheen ads and all of these things that came from here, from advertising folks from here, these songs that mean something to people, Move On Up, came from here, was born here. I think that's just no accident because of this crush of black power that was happening.
That was very good. Yeah. And I know we're kind of like moving around a little bit, but Tone mentioned when we were chatting in the back about house music, and that being like, although he didn't say this part, that being like one of the last organic musics to come out of the city, or one of the most recent, I'll say, not the last. And we have to talk about people like Frankie Knuckles, and we have to talk about people like Ron Hardy, and how they also were influencers on the music and just on how people listen to music. I played Touch and Go yesterday on my show. And just sitting listening to it, and I'm like, man, these cats were cooking. There are a lot of unbelievable musicians who live in this town who are on those house records who went uncredited, woefully so. But I would like to just have us expound a little bit on house music and its relation to soul music?
So this is kind of a complicated story, but to make a long story short, as time progressed, people were starting to do home recordings and getting away from a band because a band was so expensive. And in the midst of that, technology started to increase and become more popular. And the combination of home recordings, technology, and just creativity, house music basically, was born in probably like 83. Some people say 81, 83, 84. Just keyboards and drum machines. And from there, it became a worldwide phenomenon, obviously.
Clearly. Okay, this is the part of the program that is going to be the most controversial. No, it's not. The Chicago sound. See how you just looked at me?
I haven't answered.
Not yet. The Chicago sound, who is the architect of it? Are there architects?
That's not fair.
Who is who is the recipient of that now? Is there still a Chicago sound? One of the people in my mind, I think of Charles Stepney. I think we've mentioned him a couple times already. Tom Washington, who's up on the screen right now. Mr. Dorsey. These are the shepherds of the Chicago sound. But I asked the three of you about the Chicago sound.
I have a twofold answer to that. So I asked Gene Chandler that question years ago, and he said it's the sound of hit records, because he's a businessman, right? Like, that's what it's about.
Mississippi Rick used to say that too.
That's what it is. I'm a complicated. The great thing about Chicago versus Memphis soul or Philly soul, Memphis and Philly were sort of based around, very centrally located. So based around maybe like Philly, for instance, Sigma Sound Studios was basically where it all happened, and really one house band. Whereas in Chicago, you had all these distinct house bands, and you had a lot of people who were playing in a lot of different bands happening at the same time, who, when you talk to them, they talk about the music very broadly. So you would have somebody who was playing bass on a Caravans record, but they were also playing on a Tyrone Davis record, right? They were also playing, like, they played it all with the same amount of skill. So I think maybe it's flexibility, maybe it's the ability to toggle between all these different genres. For one thing, I will note that what I love about Chicago music is I can tell by how it sounds, whether it was recorded in Chicago or not. And part of that is the mix. There's a lot of incredible engineers, but a big part of it is the way that that rhythm is set, the way that it swings, the way that it's just got that percussive element and the choral horns that just hit you, smacking you in the face with that energy.
You can, I'm really collect more of the vocal group sound, so I would naturally go towards Curtis Mayfield, just because what he inspired in other people, Billy Butler, Major Lance, these guys, but they're more west, I guess they're more on the west side, but that Curtis Mayfield sound, the Curtis Mayfield type of writing, it was the vocal group sound. Now you have your the Boogaloo sound, which was born again in Chicago. It's kind of become more popular in New York, but it was born right here in Chicago. So I would say Curtis Mayfield.
And then for something a little bit more modern, I would say Mr. Fingers is definitely the Chicago sound. When House was becoming more popular, his sound was the most mimicked around Chicago and also around the world as well.
For me, I'm sorry, go on.
I want to add one thing. I don't want to take away from the vocals, because the vocals are super important, but really so much of the Chicago sound is the arrangements. So you talk about Richard Evans, you talk about Tom Washington, you talk about Charles Stepney, you're talking about Curtis Mayfield, you're talking about Johnny Pate, and then later on Rich Tufo and some other folks who were doing some amazing arrangements. But those arrangements, those orchestrations, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra doing strings, I mean, it added this depth, this complexity to a lot of this music that still stands up, I think.
For me, it will always be listening to those records on Cadet and on Chess, and really like studying what that was, what that sounded like. I didn't know any better because music wasn't, my forte into music was as a listener, not as a musician, but I knew what I was listening to. You know what I'm saying? So when now as I'm doing research for this project that we're hoping to do, I keep saying that we're going to do, involving Charles Stepney, and listening to all the stuff that he arranged or composed or produced or played on or wrote. It's so much, it's all in that wheelhouse that you're talking about, that bass, that drive. You refer to him specifically as shepherding the Baroque sound. I would challenge anybody in the room, if you aren't familiar, listen to Rotary Connection, listen to any Minnie Riperton early stuff, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Ramsey Lewis, particularly Mother Nature's Son. I was talking, again, chatting earlier in the back with Tony. One of the best hip-hop songs I've ever heard in my life is 50 Years by All Natural, where they use the sample of Julia by Ramsey Lewis from the album Mother Nature's Son, which is an album of Beatle records. Because Charles Stepney was influenced by George Martin, and he was trying to get Ramsey to do this album, and he was like, man, I don't know about doing a Beatles album. I don't really want to do that. And he's like, have you listened to the Beatles? Have you listened to how George Martin produces them and the arrangements and stuff? And he charted something out for him, and Ramsey heard it, and Mother Nature's Son is such an influential album. And for me, people like Ramsey and Charles Stepney, just that driving sound, that force, that like you had to listen, you were compelled to listen. And like you, I can tell when something is from here and when it's not. I don't know why I have that in me, but I'm like, they didn't record that in Chicago. But they, some of them they did, I guess.
I actually interviewed Reggie Torian, who was a member of the Impressions in the 70s, and I asked him about a song, and I said to him, this sounds like it has a Chicago sound on it. This feels like Chicago to me, even though it said something about Los Angeles. And he's like, how did you know? Because we recorded in Los Angeles, and we brought it back to Chicago, and Curtis was like, it doesn't have the thing on it, and they overdubbed it with Chicago, Quentin Joseph on drums, and a whole bunch of other people to make it sound like it was supposed to sound. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
One thing we should also mention, there's a lot of do-it-yourselfers from Chicago. We're mentioning a lot of the guys who are known, and rightfully so. But my focus, even as an artist, and what I collect and I search for, are the artists that really didn't blow up, but were just as talented. There were a lot of musicians from that era who put out their own records, and you may not be familiar with them, but those are the records today that are the valuable records. Those are the records that are sought after. We can find the Impressions record, but we can't find a PJ City 45 or Calvin Bridges records or even T.L. Barrett records, who was on a major and put out records on his own as well.
Nobody Knows by T.L. Barrett is one of my favorite songs, too. I have the fortune of being able to play that every now and then at Lumpin'. I love that song. What's in the water here in this city that turns out so many dope musicians and artists and writers? What is it? Is it that we are in the middle? What is it about this town?
Ben Lamargay, he's a wonderful
Amazing.
Musician. Wonderful musician here in Chicago. Anyway, he told me that it's this weather. It makes you, no, I'm serious. It separates the mice from the men, and it makes you really focused. It makes you have to do your thing. The other thing he said, which is very interesting, and we're in the right place for it, is being connected to this water, this thing that we all need for survival, this connection to the earth thing, makes you a little more grounded and earthy, which he's deep. So I can't explain it the way he can explain it.
Ben is a complex man in his in his explanation, no doubt.
Yeah.
What about you, Tony?
Well, each era, I believe, is different. So I'll talk about the 90s for me.
Fair enough.
We always felt like the underdog. So our drive was excessive. Chicago is also very, very competitive. So the combination of drive, talent for sure, imagination, and the lack of opportunity. So when there is one opportunity, everybody's going after it. You have to give it your best shot. So it's a kind of a only the strong survive type of atmosphere. And I just think all those features or facts compounded will give you a good result in the long term.
And you're not a Chicagoan per se.
Right.
So your observation of Chicago music is different, but what do you think is in the water in this city?
Well, looking at it from Los Angeles, it's like, to me, because I read a lot of history books and things, it's just the people that came, their desire to step up. And even when things are, when the school system's cutting music programs and stuff, hey, if you can't get horn players, well, you're gonna get records, and you're gonna take some beats, and you're gonna make a record. You know, it's there. It's in the soul already. It just needs to come out, and it's gonna come out one way or another, whether you're just scatting or taking beats off of records, and eventually it's gonna come around back to horn arrangements. All of these kids, they're gonna learn, because once you move up, once you start making some money, and now you can hire some horn guys, and now you can hire a drummer instead of a machine, and because when you're on stage, it's nothing like a drummer, you know, just to lay that beat down for you. So, and you see that now. You see that in LA with the Ice Cubes, and I mean they use full bands now. It's like not they kind of move away from the beats, you know. But
I think one of the best things about, I don't know if you know, I love Chicago a lot. I'm a big fan of where I'm from. And to kind of piggyback on what Tony said, when you are up against the wall, when your back is, I mean, not figuratively, but literally up against the wall, and you have to go on a stage or you have to play your music for someone, you better know that there's no feeling in the world like the pressure of, oh God, if this fails, I'm done. What am I gonna do? I can't keep making hammers or whatever I'm doing. You know, I have to get out there and I have to do it. And I'm more poet than musician, but I'm telling you, we did a show at the House of Blues. The Bulls were in their heyday. They stink now, but they were in their heyday. And it was a playoff game, and they delayed the show until the game ended. The game didn't end until 11 o'clock at night. Dion Cole, all these musicians, it was just like everybody that people like now were there, and they're all walking around like, man, when are we going to get a chance to play? And just the intensity in that room and everybody wanting to do better than everyone else, the competitive, all that, it is really, really real. It's a real thing. I think what's in the water in this city is that people just don't want to be told that you couldn't make it out of Chicago, because people move away. Common moved to New York. People leave. Our audiences here are hard. Like, the Apollo has nothing on a Chicago, absolutely nothing on an audience from Chicago. If you are not favored here, you'll know, like, instantly.
Chicago definitely prepares you for that outside world.
It's like talking to a mirror. You're like, man, is anybody listening to my music? They will let you know. If they like it, they'll be like, that was really good. And then they'll kind of like walk off, you know, see you on TV one day and go, oh man, I saw you, that was great. And it's the same song I sang when you said it was good.
I will note that I'm sort of an in-between generationally, because I watched a lot of people a little bit older than me leaving, and the goal was to make it big somewhere else, right? But at the same time, I was growing up discovering these records that came just before that were so rooted in this city. So I chose to stay. And I started working with kids through a program called U-Media and a couple other programs, kids like Chance and No Name, and they chose in a lot of ways to either stay or to keep repping Chicago in a way that was productive and working with the team that they built. And I do love that that is happening now, more than it was happening in my generation and the generation directly previous.
I'm a big fan of Chancellor Bennett. I'm a big fan of Fatima, No Name. I'm a big fan of them for that reason, that they didn't bounce. They could have very easily left Chicago and left it in the dust, and they just were like, nope.
Can I tell you that Fatima, so she was trying to put out her first album, right? She had just done features with people, and she couldn't figure out how to make that happen. And she said to me, I'm gonna work at Freshie. And I said, don't do that. Come be my intern. I'm gonna give you a recorder, I'm gonna give you access to a studio so you can just play around with things, and don't do that, don't work at Freshie. So I feel like—
You're responsible. Thank you.
Everybody, it takes a village though, really, of supporting these kids, these folks, these grown adult people.
I remember when her mom owned Afrocentric Books.
Right.
First black woman to own a bookstore in Chicago. And yeah, I saw him. And I remember when Fatima was born, watching her run around with her mom, and like now she's got this book club,
Right.
watching her grab books off the shelf and kind of like this, just going crazy over books. To see those kids, to see the influence that a brother like Brother Mike had on
Right.
them, it makes me feel like whatever's coming for Chicago music is going to be okay. There will be more bands that'll come out of the city, not just rappers. There'll be more singers, people like Megan McNeil. If you aren't familiar with Megan McNeil, make yourself familiar with her. She is an amazing vocalist. People like Avery R. Young, he's an amazing, talented man. There are people here in this city that are doing it, and they are right here for you, and they are waiting for you to come and check them out and enjoy them. And really, without stretching it out too much, this is right now, I think, the best time ever to be a Chicago musician, because the world has changed again and again and again, and we are still here. We are like the people who survive a nuclear fallout. We're just not gonna go anyplace. We are going to be here, and we're gonna keep creating, and we keep embracing this music and these ideas and this art, and it is the most wonderful thing to watch. It really is, for me anyway. I don't know about you, but I am enjoying the hell out of watching what Chicago is bringing to the world. It is an amazing time for me. So there is going to be a question and answer period. By the way, if you were wondering, I've always wondered this, it's water in the cups. Nothing fancy. You have to request that way in advance, apparently. But anyway, we're gonna do questions and answers.
Everyone, so this is the mic. I'll bring this around to everyone. Just ask your question. You can pass it back to me. Just 3 quick things. Just make sure to ask your question as a question. Keep it brief so we can get to as many people as possible. I forgot about the last thing, but it'll come to me. I'm just gonna bring this over.
Don't curse.
Yes, that helps.
So the question is your response to, as I'm watching YouTube, and it's a great thing for like older bands to come around, and there was interesting conversations that happened there about like why rock doesn't have the same stature that it had. And what I've heard a few times and how you feel about this is that they said it's lost its soul because of the blues bass, and that there was a big blues bass, which is which came from this country and was something unique in the world. And that because the rock has kind of lost that blues bass, that's why it doesn't hold the same stature as it did.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, the blues now, for me, it's listening to Toronto Cannon and some of the other blues artists that are here in town that I really like. They still seem to have it. Buddy Guy's still around. He still seems to have it.
He means in terms of like Cream and those classic rock acts that had a blues, right? That's what you meant? Yeah. Well, I have a lot of feelings about that. I actually, as we heard in my bio, I helped produce a rock and roll talk show. So I listen to a lot of music.
She's being modest. She helps produce Sound Opinions on WBZ, a rock and roll talk show. It's like I flip a hamburger every now and then in my house. You produce a really great show.
Thank you.
Come on, man.
Try the veal. But the point here.
Here all week.
Right. I mean, I think you're right. Musically, I do think that sound is gone, and I think that sound was electric, and I think that's a lot of people springboarded their thing off of that sound. I guess it's up to them to come up with another sound that connects to people, right?
And also, I would imagine because the British influence, or them listening to us, particularly music coming from Chicago, that's pretty much not even a thing anymore.
Well, what happens is culture, like now people are copying them.
Right.
But they're not necessarily copying the root music, so they're not getting where it actually came from. So I'm covering the Rolling Stones, but I don't even realize that I'm actually covering. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like what?
Sure.
And so it's a cover of a cover of a cover. Yeah. And so it lacks that authentic thing.
Anyone else?
I would think it has even less to do with the sound of the music and more of just where we are today and what people are into. To keep it simple. I mean, yes, let's look at it like this. If we were to put blues back in it, or put that sound back in it and put it into the mainstream, it still wouldn't be mainstream. It still wouldn't have the popularity that it did. It had its phase. I just think that's how music goes. It has its phase. Hip-hop has a phase now, but 10 years from now, it'll be something else. It's just a natural progression. And there's so many other factors that technologies being the main thing has changed what people listen to, how they listen to it, what's important, how we make it.
I think the phase of the hit before people have heard it, like so many hits were hits before they were even, out, in recent times, right? Whereas before, the songs created a life of their own, and bands came out of nowhere just playing that blues riffs and stuff like that. And that's what, the people kind of gathered around those songs. Now, a song comes out and the radio stations make it a hit because they're not city radio stations that for the people, it's just like, boom, this is gonna be a hit, this is gonna be a hit.
And real quick, radio in America is no.
Dead.
And if you look at every genre, they have the same issue. Every genre.
I'm on the radio, and I'm telling you, there's a handful of radio stations in this country that are like, yes, I will find the time to listen to it. That's why so many people move towards satellite radio now, because one, you're paying for it, and you get what you pay for. And if you've got a program director, real quick, program director from Boston moves to Chicago, he programs a radio station that's supposed to play black music. He doesn't know anything about the city or how people in the city get down. He figures, well, this must be what they like, and then he plays it 15 times an hour. Then he's like, you know what, that's not enough. Let me play it 3 times an hour, and then also let me slip in some stuff, but I'm not gonna put any Chicago artists on unless it's Chance. I'm not gonna do that because that's not valuable to me because I'm making more money playing whatever it is that I'm playing, and people listen to it and go, well, it must be a hit. It is not. Sorry.
I know a lot of the artists that are up here, but can you run through who the artists are? Because we're trying to,
Okay. That is Tom Washington. Oh, I got you. That's Tom. That's Brother Dorsey. He is the father of Chicago music for me. The Impressions. Curtis with the glasses. Oh, well, come on now. Earth, Wind, and Fire.
The Elements.
Yeah. Terry Collier. That man. I'm looking in the window.
Ruby Andrews.
Ruby Andrews, who is a very nice lady. That's Leonard
That's
Chess.
Buddy, Leonard Chess.
Buddy, yeah. Jamila Woods, the future of the funk for real. Donny Hathaway, born in Chicago. For sure. The Emotions,
They
my
have an
favorite.
Emotions t-shirt on. Do you see that?
My favorite group. Hey, that's Tony Nimble. Quincy Jones. I'm looking in the reflection in the window. The great Minnie Riperton. Oh, man.
Baby Huey and the Babysitters.
Is that the one you were like, who is that?
Shaka Khan.
Shaka Khan. I had a dream about her yesterday.
Don't tell me what
it
it
was
was.
pleasant.
That Dow's.
What's the Dells? That's a very
Yes,
early Dells.
the boys from Harvey, Illinois. Gene
Gene Chandler.
Chandler.
Common.
Lonnie Rashid Lynn. That man. Common. The Staple Singers.
Yeah.
Ramsey. Doing a very Ramsey face. The Shy
Lights.
Lights.
That's a late one.
Yeah, man.
Eugene Record on the left.
Herb. Went to Hyde Park High School. Billy Eckstein.
Yeah. Wow. It's an old G.
Yeah, it is.
That looks like Howlin' Wolf.
I was going to say Wolf.
That looks like Howlin' Wolf.
That is Megan McNeil. Megan McNeil.
She's a new young
She's
singer.
amazing.
That looks like Willie Dixon.
That's Willie
Willie
Dixon.
That's my vote.
Favorite bass player. That's Lolita Holloway.
That's Coco Taylor, it looks like.
Oh, Lolita. I think that's Lolita.
Is it Lolita Holloway?
Yeah. Eddie Harris. Yeah. Sam Cooke.
Some of these pictures are hard to.
That's Avery R. Young. That's that man. That's some fella named Curtis Mayfield. I think he's going to be good. And
Charles
that is
Stepney.
Charles Stepney. And Mahalia.
Yeah. Is that it? I think that's it.
There's one more that I don't know which one it is. No,
No, that's it.
that's Thomas Dorsey again. Who is that?
That's a good question.
That's the one I don't know.
That's new.
And I think I submitted all the pictures. Jeremiah, thank you. God bless you. Because boy, oh boy, I did put it. I submitted it. You know, we can only have so
I
many
don't know if
pictures.
he's a. I don't see. I would question.
wouldn't know
why-
about soul.
I don't know that Common should. I like Common, but I don't know if he's a soul.
Well, I only
per
think he's
se.
in the soul
If
conversation.
he is, then that opens it up. A whole lot of other people should be in there too.
Well, I
though.
think he's in the soul conversation because of the production that was done for him. A lot of that music is soul music.
That's true. But Jamila is doing a lot of things that isn't rapping.
Yes, sir.
That's another conversation.
It's on.
It's on, okay. You guys have been talking a lot about soul. What about a role of jazz? I haven't heard anybody really talking about jazz and the great, I mean, there's incredible jazz musicians coming out of Chicago. And
That's
even,
true.
And even groups like AACM and so forth that are
Well,
clearly
The only reason we
huge,
didn't.
influential jazz. And there's relationship between, jazz musicians, blues, and soul.
Well, a lot of those guys played on a lot of the records that we
Right.
were referencing. AACM, a lot of those dudes who are original members of AACM are on a lot of stuff uncredited that we know and love. But because tonight was soul music night, I think that's the only reason why we didn't talk about jazz music. I will say this, though. In Chicago, Illinois, I had a conversation with Max Roach years ago, and he talked about how important Chicago was for the genre of jazz music and how it would not have done what it did had it not been for the people who were here in Chicago. That is a theme that runs in almost every genre of music. This city is important to not just the music part, but to the people who listen to it and who are influenced by it. I am telling you, Chicago, Illinois, for what it's worth, is the center of everything. Everything. Good, bad, or indifferent.
I mean, you could say American music in the 20th century pretty easily.
The center of.
You could say everything, but you could also say American.
I stole that from a cousin. He said, well, you know where you at? Chicago, the center of the world. Yep. It's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
For chess.
I mean, like Fill Up Church. There's a long list of folks. Right, but the conversation is South Side Soul.
I share a birthday
I mean,
with
we could
Fill Up
talk,
Church.
right? Like, I'm sure we could just sit down and just talk about Pete Cozy and all these amazing jazz musicians who were on a lot of these records. Tom is an incredible pianist, and he writes these charts that are outrageous.
Amazing. Still has all the charts
Amazing.
of everything that he wrote.
Outrageous, but I mean,
He'll tell you about it, too, if you get in a conversation. I got all the charts.
he has all the charts. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to tell you.
I got it.
We have time for one more question.
All of the charts.
Hey, Thank you so much for being here tonight. I heard you talk a little bit about the preservation of some of the more obscure archives, and I think that with the death of Bob, excuse me for mispronouncing his name, Abrahamian.
Bob Abrahamian, yeah, he was a friend of mine, yes,
and,
absolutely.
you know, I was also interested in what Theaster's done with the Stony Island Arts Bank. So my question is what do you foresee as a productive way to preserve some of the legacy of some of the more forgotten or unknown people in a digital age and, you know, physically as all these incredible 45s? I mean, you have these sort of, you know, segmented people, but the public doesn't necessarily have access to them, so.
I think, and I'm going to be brief. I think we have to, like we do with photographs, we have to clean them, digitize them, reintroduce them. The gentleman brought up YouTube. I think it's important that we start really paying attention to what is out there that we would that people would consider obscure and start to reintroduce that stuff to people. Vinyl is making a definite comeback. I think it hurt a lot of people when vinyl took that turn and was not a thing anymore because it wasn't the act of going to buy a record. That's a real personal situation when you pull money out of your pocket and you get to carry something back with you, and then you do the physical act of playing a record. Those things are very important, and for a while that wasn't a thing. I think we have to educate. We have to put music back into our public school system and make it a thing. I thought you said you want to keep it brief. I'm sorry, but we have to make that a thing because that is how you get new musicians, and that is how you're able to show them who Baby Huey and the Babysitters are, and that's how you do that. You have to put that back into our curriculum. Without that, we are doomed.
I just, super quick, because I feel like I've built my life around resurrecting records. You do a great job of, like, I learned from you. I learned from him.
That's that man.
But I wanted to say, I just want to complicate it very slightly, because when we talk about records that we don't know, records that are obscure, I always say obscure to who? Because I'm always interested in excavating music that is maybe obscure to the mainstream but means something to somebody. So I do a set at the 95th Street Red Line Station as part of Theaster's art project there, and I purposely try and channel the power of Herb Kent, and I play records like Remember the Rain, which means something to people on the South Side. Thank you. See what I'm saying? But there's a lot of people here like, I don't know that song. But that song is valuable because it came from Chicago, and the story behind it is important. So, like, capturing those stories alongside that music and making sure that that doesn't die, because all that we've got as a legacy is what came before us, and that's our cultural heritage.
Well, the people who have that music first need to make it accessible. Because a lot of people who have the records that you were referring to kind of keep them to themselves, and it's their secret or their possession or their trophy that, you know, they may put up the clip, but they may not put up the artist's name.
Yeah.
So it's a wheel that will revolve, like, oh, he has the record, but we don't know what it is. Then also, there needs to be opportunity for the people who want to display that music to have that opportunity, whether it's not going to be commercial radio, but internet radio, or their own YouTube channel like this gentleman spoke of earlier. There's lots of ways that to have the outlet to put the music out there. It's another thing to get the music out there, but it's a whole nother story to get the music to the people to hear it. Because there's tons of music on YouTube that none of us listen to every day that we would enjoy. So I'm not smart enough to figure out how it becomes marketable for records that no one really listened to in the past to become marketable in today's climate. It's a complicated issue. And I don't think it's an issue that enough people care about for it to really change. So it's going to be it's an uphill battle, so to speak, because the people who are really interested in music that's super obscure is small. So for it to garner attention, it needs a bigger audience searching for that kind of music.
My collection, my passion is vocal group sound. So there was a guy here in Chicago, Armenian gentleman named Babo. Did you know?
Bob Abrahamian?
Yeah. Now, what he did is all he collected was this Chicago stuff. I mean, and he had this radio show where he just interviewed he talked to everybody, anybody that had anything to do with recording. And it's all online still. He passed away, but it's all there online. And he, from the notations to anybody, the wasted people that are so obscure. I mean, they went about their lives after recording one record, and a lot of them didn't even know the record was recorded. Recorded but pressed. Oh, wow, I've never seen it, and it's all documented online. So I think you need someone like that again. And it's like the time is running out because they're passing away. Every day, someone passes away from these artists. Nationwide, not just Chicago, but nationwide.
Ruben Molina, you can clap. Mr. Anthony Fields, Tomby Nimble. My best friend on earth.
Now I'm in trouble.
Ayana Contreras. My name is Mario Smith. Thank you.